Let's make a portrait drawing together. I'm Stephanie. I have over a decade of art teaching experience, and I'm going to show you how to use a charcoal pencil to make lifelike portraits. There's 3 basic rules to remember. Number 1, draw light till it's right. Don't be afraid to use that eraser. Number 2, use guiding lines to map everything out. And number 3, use value or shadow. Let's dig into it. I'm using a charcoal pencil. If you just want to use a normal pencil, that's fine. On my paper, I'm generally mapping out a very light oval. These are the 3 portraits that I'm going to draw. The first one is a front-facing view, and the other 2 are 3/4 views, to the left and to the right. So I'm starting to map out a line in the middle of each egg shape, but it's not a straight line, it's curved because it's wrapping around an egg or a sphere. I'm thinking of that skull as a 3D shape. So I very lightly sketched out a line in the middle, which is generally the nose. And then in between the nose and the top of the head, halfway there is about where the eyes go. And in between the nose and the bottom of the chin, about halfway is where the mouth goes. So I have a lot of experience doing this. Something that I always encourage my students is to not let your lack of skill or experience stop you. You have to practice. You have to make a million bad drawings before you make a good one. So don't be afraid to make bad drawings. The reason I love a charcoal pencil is because of how soft it is. I'm using very loose lines to start sketching out the hair. I'm gently touching the paper and going back and forth on the side of the head to make a shadow for the side of the face. That mouth is like the letter M. The top lip is usually has more shadow than the bottom lip. And then you can see I've also put some shadow under the chin, on the neck. The back of the hair is very dark. And at the top on the forehead, I've started shading in the sides of the egg because remember, it's 3D. So my highlight, the light is hitting the front of the face. Now the eye sockets go back in space. So that's why those are usually shaded. If there's light hitting the front of your face, those eye sockets usually have a shadow in them. So you can see as I get into the hair where there's a lot of shadow or a very dark value is just another word for dark or light, I'm pressing the pencil really hard to get those darkest darks. Returning to the hair, loose movements, think of hair as one big shape. A lot of people, when they first start out drawing, try to draw individual strands. I'm kind of doing that here, but I'm also thinking about a big shadowy shape for some big hair. So I'm leaving that one for now. Maybe I'll come back to it. I'm starting with the jawline of the second portrait. And then going from the middle line, which is where the nose is, to that line above it, which is where the eyes are. So this is a 3/4 view. You can see one eye more than the other. The second eye kind of disappears behind that nose. Remember, we're trying to think of all of these as 3D shapes, which is why we want to try and use shadow or light and dark as much as possible. You can see the cheekbone on the side. Yes, I'm using a line to define the edge of the face. If you want to get real fancy, you could just shade in the space behind this face to make a darker background. And then I'm starting to define the chin and the neck. Why not give them a little goatee? And the more you practice that movement with your pencil up and down, back and forth, the more you'll get those repetitive lines that look really clean when it comes to making your shadows. Touching the pencil very lightly to the paper for the very light shadow of the jawline. Remembering that the collar of the shirt curves around a 3-dimensional neck. Adding some contrast by pressing my pencil really hard to color in or shade in a dark shirt, and doing the same with the hair. Now I'm moving my pencil in a way where it's almost like I'm curving it around that 3D skull, keeping in mind that I'm not drawing on a flat circle, but a 3D head. So continuing to shade under the chin, under the jaw, because that casts a shadow on the neck. And the eyes, of course, you'll find your formula for eyes, but don't forget, to notice shadows, especially if you're looking at someone and drawing from life. That's the best way to draw. So here I've started to define the neck, which comes out kind of from each end of the jaw. The jaw is kind of like a U shape. Everyone's got kind of a different jaw. I'm finding that middle line, my guiding lines for the nose, Remember that even though we notice nostrils, there's also kind of a shadow under the nose, so I'll get to that soon. The bridge of the nose is also an opportunity to create a shadow. Going to the mouth, kind of like, a curved hill shape, the top lip usually darker than the bottom, starting to shade in the area where the eyes will be around that line. Remember, from the top of the head to the middle of the head is where like the nose would fall, and then between the nose and the top of the head, halfway there is like where the eyes would fall. So shading in the neck and trying to, have some fun with the hair. Again, yes, I'm drawing lines for hair, but I'm also trying to bring them together into a shape that has a definite value. You don't want it to be the same darkness or lightness as everything else. You want to add some definition and contrast to your drawing. This is another reason charcoal pencils are so great, because those darks get really dark. If you are drawing with a graphite pencil, a number 2 pencil, you're probably noticing that you can't push that really black with a graphite pencil. The like saturation of the color just doesn't get that intense. And of course, if you want to pump up the intensity or the darkness of a graphite pencil, you can go with softer lead. So if you have a 2B, a softer lead, which would provide a darker value, would be a 4B or a 6B or even an 8B. So moving my charcoal pencil back and forth, pressing hard to shade in the hair, and, giving little shadows under the bottom lip to define the chin, on the side of the jaw to define, where that face comes forward in space, and just having a lot of fun with keeping the lines of the hair really loose and gestural. So now I'm looking at all of my views, going back into the hair on the first one, adding a little shadow under the nose. The main thing to remember here is that drawing from life is really where you're going to grow the most, and that you just have to practice. So to summarize my 3, top points starting out with these portrait drawings: draw light till it's right. Don't be afraid to spend time mapping out where the face will go on your paper. Start with some guiding lines and add value.